Hey, it's Pete Mundo. Before the podcast starts, could you do us a favor at KCMO? We don't ask you for much outside of supporting our sponsors and advertisers. Could you leave us a 5-star rating and review? Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Helps us a lot. We so appreciate you doing that. Well, if you're a Kansan and you're a fan of common sense, today is a win for you. Good morning. It is great to be here on a frigid Wednesday across Kansas City. We are sitting right around 0 degrees. Tomorrow morning is going to be even worse, but we'll save that for tomorrow. Today is a day to celebrate on the Kansas side of the state line because yesterday, Laura Kelly, the governor, was overridden by the Senate and the House on this bill that thankfully is going to prevent potential child mutilation from happening anywhere in Kansas. It is called the Help Not Harm Act. And what the Help Not Harm Act does is it adds restrictions when it comes to using state funds regarding the promotion of gender transitions, prohibiting health care providers from providing gender transition care to children. And that is just a common sense victory. It's not about Republican or Democrat. Sadly, it's become that because, well, seems like some people have totally lost their minds on this issue. This is not about telling adults what to do with their bodies. Let's be very clear. If you're an adult in Kansas, nothing changes for you today. If you're an adult and you think you're something that you aren't, you are entitled to go about your business and do whatever you want to yourself. If you are a friend, if you are a loved one, I would do my best to talk you out of it, but the law is not there to stop you. The law is not intended to stop you. The law is intended to protect children. Children whose brains have not fully developed, children who are incapable of consenting to life-altering medications, to life-altering surgeries. And that's what this bill was about. I was shocked when Laura Kelly vetoed it. I figured she would either just let it become law. She would let it just sit there on her desk and kind of eventually turn into law in Kansas. I figured she might do that. But the fact that she vetoed it, I know that she's a lame duck. She doesn't have to run again. But I figured she would come to the obvious conclusion that this was going to get overridden. The Kansas Republicans in the House and the Senate have the supermajority to override any veto they want. And while this is not the most important issue in Kansas, I'm not saying it is. It is very much common sense. And if you want to give a win to the Kansas GOP, which hasn't had a lot of them, admittedly, around this state in recent years. I mean, Laura Kelly's beat them twice now in 2 straight elections. And yes, they win the other statewide races. And yes, they get their supermajorities, and that's a good thing. But they haven't had those massive red wins around this state. And frankly, their brand is struggling in places like right here in our backyard where we're broadcasting from in Johnson County. But this was an easy victory. This, you poll it nationwide, it's an easy 65-35, 70-30 issue, depending on what poll you want to look at. So that's why it was so important politically for the Kansas GOP to override it, but also it was just common sense to protect kids. That's what this was about. And people can sit there and they can scream about how, oh my gosh, my kid can't get his private parts chopped off. Oh my gosh, what are we doing here?
How dare you?
And then common sense prevails. And people say, no, you know what? That's not something we should be doing to children. Mutilation of kids is not something that should be celebrated, and it's not something that should be accepted. So this is simply about one thing and one thing only, being on the right side of history. That's what this is about. And making sure that children are protected until they're of a certain age where they can make these decisions on their own. And when you get to that certain age, you do you, man or woman or whatever. Maybe I shouldn't have used that word or words. I don't know what to say. Just you do you. That's what this comes down to. So this was a big win yesterday. The Help Not Harm Act getting across the finish line, overriding Governor Kelly's veto. And it's been a tough week for Governor Kelly. On Monday, she was showing sympathy to the protesters in Topeka who were out there protesting Elon Musk outside of the state capitol. This was something that I was surprised to see her quoted on. In the Kansas Reflector, she said on Monday, "I'm very concerned about what's going on in a number of agencies on a federal level where access to individuals' personal private information is being made accessible to people with no security clearance and no accountability." So she's taking that line that you're hearing all over cable news where people are saying, "Oh, man, what's Elon going to do with my social security number?" Okay. Most of the people who are afraid of Elon Musk, the guy who used to own PayPal, I will add, having your social security number and then immediately jumping on TikTok where the Chi-Coms have all the information on you they could possibly desire. The same people who don't care one bit about giving up their social security number when they, book an airline, when they go to the DMV, when they do just about anything, suddenly are worried about what the richest man is going to do with your social security number. Like, no offense, people are probably trying to steal Elon's social security number, John. He's not trying to steal ours.
Yeah, the release on expenditures, meanwhile, was banged out on a Commodore 64 and backed up on a floppy disk.
Yeah.
I think we've got some other things to focus on here locally.
You would think so, right? And that's where Laura Kelly would be wise to stay in her lane. And as she ran on for 2 terms, stay in the middle of the road. I know you're a lame duck, but if you actually want to have a legacy beyond your 2 terms in office, and theoretically, I would imagine she's going to try to get her handpicked Democratic successor across the finish line in next year's 2026 governor's race, she can't just go all the way to the left because, well, who cares? I'm a lame duck. She's going to lose all her juice. She's not going to be able to play that middle-of-the-road game if she's knocking Doge, which is going to be overwhelmingly popular in the state of Kansas where Trump won by 15, 16 points. And then on top of that, specifically vetoing bills that say kids cannot get, air quotes, gender-affirming care. I can't stand that phrase because it's not true. There's no affirming one's gender. You are what you are. If you want to switch it, I mean, when you're an adult, I suppose that's your prerogative. But the whole notion of affirming something that is not true, is not going to make it sound better by calling it gender-affirming care. It's just body mutilation. And if you want to do it when you become an adult, I'm not going to sit here and say that you should be stopped. I'm not. But if we don't protect children in our society, what are we doing? We don't let kids get tattoos. We don't let them drink. We don't let them smoke. We don't let them drive. There are reasons for that. And yes, it's about safety of others, but in a lot of cases, it's about their own safety. And if people want to keep arguing on the other side about how this is really just about making sure that kids are comfortable in their own bodies, please. You had a moment there a few years ago when maybe it seemed like you were on to something and the public was on your side. That ship has long sailed. It is gone, man. 913-408-7957. It is good to be here on a frigid Wednesday across Kansas City on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. We are streaming all morning long on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Dan Hawkins, the Kansas Speaker of the House, is going to address this overturning of Governor Kelly's veto at 7:05 right here on 95.7 FM. In the meantime, there are a group of employees who may get laid off today in Kansas City by Doge. Who and why, we'll tell you next on KCMO. Layoffs could begin for IRS employees in Kansas City as quickly and as soon as today. That could be happening. And I guess I'm supposed to shed a tear over this. I guess I'm supposed to be outraged by this. I mean, I don't like to see any fellow Kansas Citian lose his or her job. I don't. I mean, just inherently as a human being, I don't want to see that. I don't think you want to see that. But people lose their jobs every single day in this town. Somebody is driving to work right now, listening, hopefully enjoying the show at 6:20 on a frigid Wednesday morning, and is going to get fired today or get laid off today. That's probably the better way to put it. Firing for cause is different than getting let go. Someone's going to get let go. I mean, I don't want it to be you. I don't want it to be me. I don't want it to be John or Mark. I don't think it will be any of us, but I'll knock on wood as they say that in the radio business. You never quite know, right? But for some reason, the news is trying to make us all freak out about, wow, we might have less IRS employees in Kansas City come the end of the day. This news dropped courtesy of Shannon Ellis. She is the president of the NTEU Chapter 66 union here in Kansas City. That's the National Treasury Employees Union. And she did a Facebook Live video where she talked about how they don't know when it's happening or who it's happening to, and it's not clear on how this is all going to go down.
It is stated that our probationary employees will be removed as of tomorrow. We don't know what time. We don't know how it's going to happen. We don't even know if it includes all of our probationary employees.
Well, welcome to getting laid off. You typically don't know when it's going to happen. You don't really know who it's going to happen to. Businesses make these decisions every single day. And it sucks. All right? It's a hard part of the real world. It's not something that anybody wants to do. Nobody wants to let somebody go. There's families at stake. There's livelihoods at stake. No one wants to do it. But tough times call for very difficult and tough decisions. And I don't care what line of work it is. Sometimes tough decisions have to happen. Okay, and for far too long, we have put government employees on this pedestal over those of us who actually fund the government, those of us in the private sector. And I'm not trying to make this private versus public. I'm really not, because there's many of you in the public sector who listen, whether you're in law enforcement. Heck, I've talked to people who work for the Department of Treasury. You work for the IRS. You work for the FBI. There's a lot of people like that in Kansas City. I'm not making it us against them. I really don't want to do that. And if you're interpreting it that way, you're missing the broader point. The broader point is none of us are part of some protected class. None of us. In my industry or in your industry. And if you think that your industry is so important that, gosh, we can't ever cut somebody, well, that's just absurd. I heard JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon say this one time. And he talked about how he could go into probably any department in his company and whack 10% of the staff and be just as efficient. And he's probably right about that. And if you were to apply that to the government, let's be honest, it's probably double that, easily. Probably 20%, no questions asked. So when I see these union presidents at the IRS here in Kansas City basically begging the news for sympathy, and they got it in some places last night. I saw it on the local news. I saw it on Channel 9, saw it on some of the other local stations. I'm sitting there and I'm saying to myself, what's the purpose of this? So there will be some IRS employees in Kansas City that get laid off. That stinks. Is that a citywide news story? Is it certainly something that's going to draw a lot of sympathy from the community today, from a metro of 2.5 million people? I mean, you tell me at 913-408-7957. I might just be a little ornery this morning because I don't like it when it's 0 degrees outside. But you tell me otherwise. I mean, I'm just sitting here and saying, welcome to the real world. And as you heard from Shannon Ellis there, these are going to be individuals who are probationary employees. Basically, those are the people who are recently hired. That's what that means. That means your newest hires. And what happens in many industries and many businesses, if you have to go through some type of layoff, what does it usually include? A lot of the people that are going to be let go are those who are oftentimes the most recent hires. You see that in business all the time. Because if you start laying off longtime employees, there are morale hits. That's what happens, right? Whereas if you get rid of people that are more new, that are, recent hires, it's less likely to have a major impact on your morale because they're kind of new. If you're letting go of 20-year employees, unless they're like way overpaid and not doing their jobs, typically those are not the people that you want to see hit the road. Typically speaking, that's not what you want to see. So that may be what ultimately ends up happening here at the IRS headquarters in Kansas City. And that's frankly how it should be if those are the decisions that need to be made. 913-408-7957. Let's go to Bob. He's in Kansas City first up. Go ahead, Bob. You're on KCMO. Good morning.
Hi, Pete. Good morning. Okay, so I am a federal employee here in Kansas City. I talked to your screener about where I work, and I don't want to say on the air. What DOJ is missing here is they're going after the low-hanging fruit, okay? Where they can really cut the fat, where there's large levels of fat, is in upper levels of management. That's where the fat needs to be cut, and that's where the money can be saved. So that's what they're not looking at. They're just like making these like really quick decisions. Like, for example, there's a manager. And so like you have like 5 levels of management, and if like 2 levels of those management, like if they went on vacation for a year, no one would notice. Okay. But the people you're talking about who are going to get laid off today or fired, as you say, those people are needed. Okay. The upper management people really don't do any, I call it real work. They don't do real work. They do conference calls and they send out emails. They look at reports. They don't do real work. They're not worker bees. That's where the cuts need to be made.
Well, that's true. I would say that's true in most corporate settings, right? Like it's the old joke about middle management, the guys or gals who are trying to make it look like they do something around here that actually are usually the most useless. You're right. Middle management is prime for the picking as far as I'm concerned. But I guess I would say, how do we know that DOJ isn't eventually going to get there?
I would find it, well, I hope they do. And if I ever get someone in a point where I get in front of someone who will actually listen to me about that, I'm going to make that decision because the people in those positions are not going to report themselves. But
well, of course not. Now I'm going to assume that you're not middle management, right, Bob? I don't want to put you on the spot. Okay, you're a worker bee.
I'm an important worker bee in this government agency. Okay, they would notice if I wasn't there. Okay, they'd notice. Okay, so here I'll give you an example. So,
Bob, I got to run. I'm out of time, man. But I do appreciate it. Stay in touch and listen. We're on the same page. What I would add to Bob's point with is this: there are people at the low end who may be duplicating roles that other people can do because the Biden administration ramped up government hiring to make the jobs numbers look good. So I say hit them on both ends, middle management, and if there are people doing 2 jobs that, or doing jobs that are already being done, then handle it that way as well. 913-408-7957. You tell me, what's your sympathy level on a scale of 1 to 10 for Shannon Ellis? She is the Chapter 66 NTEU president, which is the union for the National Treasury employees.
It is stated that our probationary employees will be removed as of tomorrow. We don't know what time. We don't know how it's going to happen. We don't even know if it includes all of our probationary employees.
That is here in Kansas City. That was on our Facebook page yesterday. So that's referring to today, that layoffs could begin for IRS employees in Kansas City on Wednesday. We just had a caller say, and he works for the federal government, Bob, and God bless him. He said, hey, listen, where they're missing a lot of the fat is in middle management. I believe they're going to get to that. I mean, Elon Musk, when he bought Twitter and made it X, what did he cut? 70, 80% of the workforce? Like, he understands the waste in middle management. We all do if you spent a minute in corporate America. So that's absolutely true. But what I imagine is going on here, if I'm just guessing and looking from afar, is that part of this is happening when it comes to the easiest things first. And it's easiest to say, okay, if you're someone who is recently hired and we think that you are doing a job that someone else can handle or is handling and we're not clear on what your role is here, well, that's easy. That's like first things to handle. And then over time, you hopefully get to some of that bloat at the middle and higher levels of any agency, especially bureaucracies like the IRS. 913-408-7957. Jonathan, go ahead. You're on KCMO in Kansas City. What's happening?
Yeah, so, the problem is twofold. One, obviously we have inefficiency, and inefficiency should be cleaned up in government, business, wherever. The other problem is a lot of these agencies, not only are they inefficient, they've been highly politicized, which is a problem when you make them so big. The IRS has been politicized for at least over a decade, if not longer, going back to the Obama administration with Lois Lerner. And so it's not just a concern of, well, are they being efficient at their job, which is collecting, and revenue and all that, but are they so big that it's too easy to politicize them? And, expecting people to feel bad for them, I'm sorry, after they've been so politicized, that would be like Putin going on the air and saying, well, we're going to have to let some KGB people go. I mean, Are we supposed to feel bad about that? Because the only
thing I'll say is I think most of the politicization comes at the top ends of these bureaucracies, and I don't think many of the average workers are as political as what you get at the top end. But you can counter that by saying, look at Washington, D.C., where 92% of Washington, D.C. voted for Kamala Harris.
Correct. And not only that, what you have to worry about is, you could say, well, the people at the top gave orders. Yes. And if they have an army of over 10,000 agents under them, they have a very big army to wield a lot of political power. So even if you say, well, the order's coming from up top, well, if you have a smaller army under you, it's hard to have the power of the king, isn't it?
It is. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Bob, go ahead. You're on KCMO. What's happening, Bob?
Yes, Pete, thank you. I'm an ex-construction worker. I'm retired now. But probably 25 years ago, I worked at the Bendix plant on 95th Street, which was government. They did governmental work, and it was kind of a lot of security and what have you. But I remember, like it was yesterday, that we had to go through like a 4-hour initiation of, the rules and regulations of the Bendix plant. And I can remember the instructor telling us, and it was probably 10 or 15 of my guys in there, construction guys, and he said, now, when you're in here working, he said, you're going to see people walk around, and he said they'll be walking around. He said you'll probably see them several times in a day making the circle because it was a huge complex. And he said, now you're going to think that they don't have anything to do. And his comments, and it stuck with me, he said, the fact of the matter is they don't have anything to do. Now, honestly, Pete, that was exactly his words. I remember like it was yesterday.
That was a curveball I didn't see coming there, Bob. Nice job.
Yeah, well I didn't either. Thank you, Pete. Great show.
Hey, Bob.
Love listening to you guys.
Thank you. Hey, Bob, real quick, where are you from? Because I'm trying to figure out your accent.
I'm actually from a town called Birkenhead, which is near Liverpool, England. And I've been here, Pete, since 1971. I love it. And if you can give me a minute, I almost called you last week because I got an email from a brother-in-law in England, I think it was last Friday, and he was just touching base. And his comment, at the end of his email, he said, when you get done with Donald Trump, could you please send him over here? He said, this country is in a mess. Pete, this brother-in-law of mine, trust me, I've had several conversations with him over the last 50-some years. He was not a big United States fan at one time, but he asked, could we send Donald Trump to UK. He said it is a mess.
Wow.
Just getting off the subject a little bit.
No, well, thank you for that. Hey, I saw J.D. Vance in one of his speeches. It might have even been one that happened overnight since he's over there. He said the UK will be the first Islamist country with nuclear weapons.
I would not doubt that. Pete, I was home a year and a half ago. I'm actually going back this later this summer. Pete, it's not. Pete, the one thing I noticed. It's a little. I'm going a little bit back, and I don't mean to take too much of your time, but I appreciate you listening to me. The one thing I noticed when I came to Kansas City on November 26, 1971, day after Thanksgiving. The one thing I noticed about Americans, Pete, they did for themselves. It was not the case when I lived in England. That's the difference to me. Americans do for themselves, and like I say, it's just the difference to me.
Incredible. Thank you, Bob. Glad you're here, man. I appreciate that, and good call all around. Well done. Yeah, this is J.D. Vance. This quote and this clip just started popping up here in the last hour or so. And here he is. I'm trying to figure out where he gave this speech. National conservatism is what the backdrop says and the podium says. But anyway, here was J.D. Vance, as I've seen this clip on social media, really over the last hour or two. Here we go.
I was talking with a friend recently, and we were talking about, one of the big dangers in the world, of course, is nuclear proliferation, though, of course, the Biden administration doesn't care about it. And I was talking about, what is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK, since Labour just took over. But
that was J.D. Vance this morning. So he gave this, just seeing this in real time, at a speech on behalf of the Edmund Burke Foundation. The Edmund Burke Foundation is a conservative organization based in the Netherlands. And that's where he gave this speech here in the last couple hours or so. And that social media clip is starting to make the rounds right now. You think the AFC Championship game was expensive here at Arrowhead Stadium? My gosh, I am not a hockey fan at all. It's a good in-person sport to watch, but it's very difficult on TV. But this Four Nations Championship tonight between Team USA and Canada is going to be played in Boston, Massachusetts. And the get-in price right now on StubHub for the worst seat in the house is going to run you about $1,000. And this comes after, of course, they played in Montreal over the weekend. This is replacing All-Star Weekend for the NHL, which is actually working out pretty well for them. It's getting way more attention than the NHL All-Star Game would have ever received, where they're playing countries against each other. They're calling it the Four Nations Face-Off. And on Saturday,
used to call it the Olympics, and it was interesting back then. But it's actually better now that it's against a North American country. Right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So what you have here now is USA playing Canada tonight in Boston. They played in Montreal on Saturday, and Team USA won that game 3-1. And you had the Canadians booing the USA's national anthem. You had 3 fights break out in the first 9 seconds. And how much of this would have happened anyway, I don't know. But obviously, with the way that Trump is trolling Canada, calling Trudeau Governor Trudeau, calling him the 51st state, there's obviously a lot here that is bubbling up under the surface that is leading to great animosity between these two teams and these two countries right now. So Boston is going to be electric tonight. I may watch it just to see if we get 3 fights in the first 9 seconds of the game. And if we don't, I'm turning it off at second number 10. At the 1950 mark of the first period, I'm out. If I don't see a fight, I'm done. But if you want a decent seat in the lower bowl in Boston tonight, it's going to run you a couple grand, man. I mean, I'm looking at tickets, $1,600. That's before the ridiculous fees they slap on these things as well. If you want a good seat, center ice, $2,800. With fees, that's probably pushing, I don't know, $3,200, $3,300. Are you going to bet on this tonight, Mark? You going to wager on this thing at all or no?
I might look at it. I haven't decided yet.
I see it's USA minus 1.5. So they got to win like 3-1 to win you some money.
Nuance was one of Canada's better players didn't play in the last game, but just for FYI, Canada's kind of quick and speedy, and the U.S. is much more physical, so that those two types of hockey are clashing once again.
So are you telling me that you're also into soccer and hockey, John, two sports that I really don't care about?
I've got you covered there. I'll cover that angle on the show.
All right. And I got golf, so we're all clear.
You might as well take tennis while you're at it.
Nah, tennis bores me. Not a tennis guy. I can't watch tennis.
All right, we got something to talk about there.
Yeah, we'll skip the tennis altogether. No interest there. And then meantime, we just talked about it with a caller, but it looks like this game tonight at Sporting KC is supposed to be on with Lionel Messi playing here in Kansas City. I can't imagine that they're actually going to do this. This game's supposed to start at, 7 o'clock tonight when it's going to be 6 degrees. There's no way they're putting an old soccer player out there in 6-degree weather. There's no way, John.
Well, the Dippin' Dots will hold, that's for sure. Right?
That's about it. If you could actually get your hand out of your glove to scoop them, they're going to be too frozen. So this game has not been called off tonight. Between who? Sporting KC and
Inter Miami.
Inter Miami.
Both MLS clubs, but this is not an MLS game. The league hasn't started. This is CONCACAF's Champions League.
Okay.
So the big tournament with all the clubs in it right now. It happens to be 2 MLS clubs. And, of course, it brings one of the bigger stars to Kansas City. Therefore, all the frustration and consternation.
Well, hey, I'll just say this much. Whoever thought it was a good idea to play a soccer game in Kansas City in middle February is an absolute imbecile and should never be in charge of anything again.
Absolutely not.
My goodness. Layoffs at the IRS. Ask yourself this. Have you ever shed a tear for a group of workers in any industry in Kansas City? Ever? No, because you probably don't know about it. But because of Doge, because of Elon Musk, because of the news wanting to cover this stuff as, God forbid, the worst thing ever, because you could never fire a government employee because they're all so essential, this is now garnering big local headlines. That per Shannon Ellis, who is the union president, Chapter 66, here in Kansas City, layoffs are going to be happening this week. And apparently, we're now all supposed to be outraged by this.
It is stated that our probationary employees will be removed as of tomorrow. We don't know what time. We don't know how it's going to happen. We don't even know if it includes all of our probationary employees.
Now, apparently, there already have been layoffs here over the last couple of weeks around Kansas City. So I don't know if she's trying to fearmonger around this or trying to drum up some enthusiasm from the National Treasury Employees Union, but this has already been happening.
Layoffs?
Yeah.
Layoffs? Are you kidding me?
Where's Jim Mora? Where are you, Jim? Oh, my gosh.
Right?
Playoffs? Don't talk.
Don't talk about layoffs. No, I'm going to talk about layoffs, okay? Because layoffs happen every day all over Kansas City. But because it's Doge, because it's Elon, because it's Trump, because it's the government, we're now all supposed to be outraged by this. Really? I'm not. I mean, I feel bad for individuals who may lose their jobs because I don't want to see anybody lose their jobs. I mean, I've worked with people in recent months who have lost their jobs. I've talked to them. We've had conversations. As a human being, you feel for them. But then you have to strip down your emotion of like, gosh, I hate to see someone lose their gig, and then say, well, guess what? Tough decisions have to be made. But for some reason, we're not supposed to look at our government like a business. We're not supposed to apply the same principles that you apply to your small business or you apply to your corporation to the government. It's just supposed to be this never-ending cycle of printing money, causing inflation, employing people, and being a jobs program for whoever and everybody, and no one can question it. And guess what? That's not how it works. And that's not how it's supposed to work. So I will have empathy for anybody who loses their job today at the Kansas City IRS building. But I'm not going to act like this is the most outrageous thing ever. And, oh, my gosh, you mean people are getting fired at the government level? This cannot happen.
How dare you?
No. And if you need a case in point on this, I saw this go viral. This is not a worker here in Kansas City, but it is a federal worker who went viral on TikTok because she claims to have lost her dream job as a geologist for the federal government. And here was her viral clip that we will play on KCMO Talk Radio.
Hello. I was a federal worker who had 1 month left of her probationary period. And today I was told that I will be terminated at some point this week. I'm utterly devastated. I'm confused because my recent performance evaluation was exceptional and I got upwards of $1,500 as a bonus because my performance was so good. And this was my dream job. And it's just being taken away by an administration who doesn't care about science. It doesn't care about people who might be homeless with their dog now.
What?
They don't care about our species that we're trying to conserve. That's exactly what my job was doing. It was just to assess habitat conservation for species for a 55-year habitat conservation plan. We should all be so mad right now. We should all be crying like this because I'm just devastated.
Are you crying? Did I see you shed a tear in there, John? I saw you wiping away something on your face.
No,
was
I
that
was looking
Mitch?
up geology to see what that had to do. I thought the study of she was working on rocks and things, but she claimed something else there. So I don't know if that's her problem or my problem there, but I'm like, that seems a little convoluted.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
I am not crying. I feel bad for her because I feel bad for anybody who loses their job, assuming they're a halfway decent person. But I thought she made a comment in that sob story that really stood out to me. And it was when she referenced being homeless. And there are people who are going to be homeless courtesy of this administration. If you have a job and you get let go from that job and you end up being homeless, then that kind of confirms why you should not have had a job, because it means you have no skill sets that translate to anything else that anybody else can use that they would pay you for. So saying, if I don't have a job from the government, I'm going to be homeless, I hate to break it to you, but that's the point.
Well, exactly. We talk about people on probationary periods. It always works that way in most businesses. The last one hired is the first one out.
Yeah.
Right? It kind of works on seniority. So it's not so much low-hanging fruit. It's that theorem first, right?
Last in, first out.
Yeah.
That happens in business all the time. If you got to make major cuts, oftentimes you will let go of the people who just came in. That may be perceived as unfair, but it's an easy way to do it. And that's part of how Doge is going about this right now. And yes, it stinks when people lose their job, but guess what stinks worse? $36 trillion in debt, $2 trillion annual deficit that is unsustainable and is crushing this country.